Have you ever wondered if the world is simply too loud, or if you were born with a layer of skin missing, leaving your nerves exposed to the raw, unedited frequency of existence? Most people walk through life as if they are encased in lead, shielded by a dense, heavy layer of indifference that allows them to navigate the chaos without a scratch. But for you, a single sharp word can feel like a physical blow, and the heavy atmosphere of a crowded room can cling to your soul like soot. You have likely been told that you are too sensitive, that you need to toughen up, or that your depth of feeling is a defect in your design. What if the opposite were true? What if your sensitivity isn't a glitch in the machinery of your biology, but the emergence of a specific type of human architecture that has been recognized and feared for millennia? We are entering a territory where the modern labels of psychology fall short, and where we must look toward the ancient distinctions of the soul to understand the burden you carry. In the hidden traditions of the past, humanity was not seen as a monolithic group, but as a spectrum of internal orientations. At one end stood the Hylic, the man of matter, bound by his instincts and the density of the earth. At the other end stood the Pneumatic, the soul of breath and spirit, whose nervous system was built not for the hammer, but for the harp. Today, we are going to dismantle the myth that being sensitive is synonymous with being weak. We are going to explore the dangerous traps of the subtle mind, the vices of passivity that often disguise themselves as spirituality, and the path toward becoming a mature, sovereign observer. This is not a journey into self-pity. It is a field manual for the pneumatic soul, a guide to navigating a world that was built by and for the material man. If you have ever felt like a stranger in your own skin, it may be because you are carrying a hidden rank that you haven't yet learned how to wield. To understand the friction you feel every day, we must first look at the invisible divide between two fundamentally different ways of experiencing reality. Imagine the world as a vast ocean of information. The majority of people, those the ancients called the Hylics, are like heavy ships built of thick iron. They navigate the waves of life by sheer weight and momentum. Their reality is anchored in the tangible, the physical, and the immediate gratification of the senses. For them, a sound is just a sound, and an emotion is a fleeting chemical event that rarely leaves a stain. Their strength lies in their density, their ability to endure the friction of the world without being changed by it. But the pneumatic soul operates on a different physics entirely. You are not a ship of iron, you are a sail of silk. Because you are less dense, you catch winds that the material man cannot even perceive. You feel the subtle shifts in the barometric pressure of a room, the unspoken tensions between people, and the silent echoes of the history of a place. This high conductivity is your nature. It is a state of being where the veil between the inner world and the outer world is thin, almost translucent. To the Hylic, your reactions seem exaggerated or irrational because they are literally not seeing the world that you are seeing. They are deaf to the frequencies that are currently deafening you. However, we must confront a difficult truth that many sensitive people use as a hiding place. There is a profound difference between a pneumatic soul and a weak personality. In our modern age, it has become fashionable to spiritualize our passivity, to call our inability to handle life a sign of our high vibration. But sensitivity without a directed will is not a gift, it is a catastrophe. If your sensitivity makes you a victim of every passing mood, if it paralyzes you in the face of conflict, or if it causes you to retreat into a labyrinth of endless mentalism, then you are not wielding your nature. You are being consumed by it. The ancients knew that the pneumatic soul faced a unique set of spiritual dangers. While the material man suffers from the vices of brutality and ignorance, the subtle man suffers from the vices of the clouds. These are the traps of self-absorption, the habit of overanalyzing every shadow until the light of action is extinguished, and the subtle arrogance of believing that your suffering makes you superior. A mature soul is one that has learned how to be as soft as water and as hard as a diamond, depending on what the moment requires. The goal is not to become less sensitive, but to become more sovereign. It is funny how the oldest advice in the world is to know thyself, yet for the sensitive person, this is often the hardest final boss to beat. We spend so much time absorbing the identities and the pains of others that we forget the shape of our own spirit. We become like a mirror that has forgotten it is an object and thinks it is the room it reflects. But what happens when the mirror decides to stop reflecting and starts to shine its own light? What happens when the pneumatic soul realizes that its sensitivity is not a vulnerability to be protected, but a sensory organ for a reality that most people will never know. If you are ready to stop being a sponge for the world's toxicity and start becoming a master of your own internal landscape, we must look at the specific laws that govern your energy. We must ask ourselves, how do we distinguish between a divine intuition and a nervous system that is simply overloaded? How do we build a fortress of silence in a world that never stops screaming? The map to this mastery exists, but it requires a shift in perspective that most are unwilling to make. To move from being a victim of your own depth to being a master of it, we must begin with the first and most vital pillar of the mature soul, the art of discerning the source. Imagine for a moment that your mind is a grand cathedral with 100 open windows. On a sunny day, the light pours in and illuminates the carvings on the walls. On a stormy day, the wind howls through the nave and threatens to extinguish every candle. The mistake most sensitive people make is assuming that every wind that blows through their cathedral belongs to them. They feel a sudden wave of heaviness in a grocery store and decide they must be depressed. They catch a glimpse of someone's anger and spend the next 3 hours wondering what they did wrong. This is the state of the unrefined pneumatic, a soul that is highly conductive but has no internal filter. To master this, you must adopt the perspective of the Stoics, particularly Marcus Aurelius, who reminded us that our internal world is the only thing we truly own. He suggested that if you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it. And this you have the power to revoke at any moment. For the sensitive person, this means realizing that at least 70% of what you feel throughout the day is simply atmospheric noise. It is the emotional exhaust of a world that is constantly screaming. The practice here is surprisingly simple, yet demands a warrior's discipline. It is called the 3-second audit of origin. Whenever a powerful emotion or a sudden shift in energy hits you, do not immediately invite it in for tea. Instead, pause and ask, is this a signal or is this noise? A signal is something that carries specific information relevant to your life and your growth. Noise is just the static of the crowd. By naming the sensation as external noise, you create a microscopic layer of air between yourself and the feeling. You stop being the ocean that is tossed by the storm, and you become the lighthouse that watches it. This is the first step towards sovereignty, the realization that your sensitivity is a sensory tool, not a command center. If you cannot distinguish between your own heart and the world's chaos, you will spend your entire life living someone else's biography. Once you have learned to identify the noise, you must face the reality of the environment you live in. We live in an age of the Hylic man, an era where the dense, the fast, and the brutal are the standard settings of society. For the pneumatic soul, this environment is not just annoying, it is corrosive. This brings us to the second pillar, the construction of the frequency shield. Many people in spiritual circles talk about protection as if it were a magical ritual involving crystals or sage, but the ancients understood it as an alchemical change in the soul's density. Consider the Kybalion and the Hermetic principle of vibration. It states that nothing rests, everything moves, and everything vibrates. If your internal vibration is set to a state of passive absorption, you will naturally pull in every low-frequency energy in your vicinity. To protect yourself, you do not build a wall of stone, you build a state of intentional transparency. A stone wall can be broken by a large enough hammer, but you cannot break the air with a sword. The frequency shield is a mental state where you allow the world's brutality to pass through you without finding a place to land. The practical application of this is the technique of vaporization. Imagine that the harsh comment from a co-worker or the aggressive energy of a driver is like a puff of smoke. If you are a solid object, that smoke will hit you and leave a mark. But if you decide to become spatially aware, you recognize that there is more space between your atoms than there is matter. You visualize the energy passing through the gaps in your architecture and dissolving into the ground behind you. You are not blocking the world, you are refusing to give it a target. This allows you to remain sensitive and perceptive while staying completely untouched by the poison. It is the paradox of being a soft warrior. You see everything, you feel the texture of the moment, but your core remains as cool and unbothered as the bottom of a deep lake. However, as we move deeper into the pneumatic path, we encounter a danger that comes from within. The third pillar, which is escaping the labyrinth of mentalism. This is the specific vice of the intellectual and the sensitive. Because your mind is built for depth of processing, It has a tendency to turn into a closed loop. You don't just think, you overthink. You don't just observe, you obsess. You can spend days analyzing the hidden meaning behind a single sentence, weaving a complex web of what-ifs until you are completely paralyzed. This is where the pneumatic soul becomes sick. It becomes all head and no body, floating away from the earth into a realm of pure abstraction. In the Zen tradition, there is a profound emphasis on returning to the suchness of reality. A peach is a peach. A mountain is a mountain. The labyrinth of mentalism is broken not by more thinking, but by the shock of the senses. When you find yourself spinning in a mental loop, you are indulging in a form of spiritual cowardice. You are using your sensitivity as a reason to avoid the risk of action. You must learn to ground the circuit. When the mental energy becomes too high, you must force it into the physical world. The action for this is the weight of the world exercise. The moment you catch yourself overanalyzing, stop. Find 5 physical things you can touch: the wood of a desk, the fabric of your shirt, the cold water from a tap. Do not think about them, feel their density. This brings the pneumatic soul back into the body, reconnecting the spirit with the matter. It reminds you that while your mind can visit the stars, your feet are still planted on the dirt. A vision that cannot be translated into a physical act is just a hallucination. If you want to be a master of your nature, you must learn to bridge the gap between your high-frequency insights and the low-frequency reality of getting things done. It is funny how we often think of spirituality as moving upward, when for the sensitive person, the most spiritual thing you can do is learn how to move downward into your own bones. This leads us to the final and most powerful pillar, the transition from being a passive sponge to becoming a sovereign visionary. The world does not need more people who are hurt by reality. It needs people who can use their sensitivity to see the path forward. This is what the mystic G.I. Gurdjieff called conscious labor. It is the act of using your heightened perception as a deliberate tool for observation. A passive, sensitive person walks into a room and feels bad because the energy is off. A sovereign visionary walks into that same room, identifies exactly why the energy is off, and then consciously introduces a different frequency to balance it. You are not here to be a victim of the atmosphere. You are here to be an architect of it. This requires you to move from empathy to compassion. Empathy is feeling someone else's pain and drowning in it with them. Compassion is seeing the pain, understanding its structure, and remaining strong enough to offer a hand. To do this, you must develop the Watcher's Journal. Every day, record one instance where your intuition gave you an insight that others missed. Do not just record the feeling, record the result. Did you sense a friend was struggling? Did you see a flaw in a plan before it happened? By documenting these subtle victories, you build a record of your own competence. You stop seeing your sensitivity as a burden and start seeing it as a high-level intelligence report. But here is the paradox that keeps most seekers trapped. To become a sovereign visionary, you must be willing to be misunderstood. The Hylic man will never understand why you need silence. The material world will never reward you for noticing the cracks in the foundation until the building actually falls. You must find your validation within the accuracy of your own vision, not in the applause of the crowd. It seems the hardest part of being awake is watching everyone else sleep, but if you can learn to live in that tension without becoming bitter, you become something truly rare, a bridge between the worlds. If you have followed me this far, you are beginning to see that your problem was never your sensitivity. Your problem was your lack of training. You were a master musician who was trying to play a Stradivarius as if it were a shovel. Now that you have the map of your own architecture, the question changes. What will you do with the signals you receive? How will you use your ability to see the invisible to change the visible? The world is waiting for your vision, but it will only listen if that vision is backed by the strength of a sovereign soul. We have spent our time building the 4 pillars of a sovereign soul, moving from the chaotic noise of the unrefined sensitive to the disciplined vision of the master. But now we must step beyond the practicalities of mental shielding and grounding exercises to face the most haunting question of all. Why are you like this? Why does the universe require a specific percentage of its inhabitants to live with their nerves on the outside, to suffer the weight of 1,000 unspoken truths, and to carry the burden of a perception that often feels like a curse? To answer this, we must look past the biological wiring of the brain and into the very architecture of the cosmos itself. What if your sensitivity is not a personal trait at all, but a functional necessity for the survival of the human spirit? Imagine for a moment that humanity is a single vast organism, a collective body navigating the dark waters of time. In any complex organism, there are different types of cells. Most are structural. They provide density, strength, and the ability to endure physical impact. These are the Hylics of the world, the men of matter who keep the machinery of civilization running. But an organism made only of bone and muscle is blind and deaf. It needs a nervous system. It needs cells that are thin, conductive, and highly reactive to the slightest change in the environment. You are those cells. You are the specialized sensors of the human collective, designed to detect the subtle rot of corruption, the early whispers of collapse, and the first golden rays of a new creative possibility long before the rest of the body is even aware that something has changed. This leads us to a paradox that might just change the way you view your entire life. What if you aren't actually the one who is feeling the world? What if the universe is using you to feel itself? In the daring theories of the participatory universe, thinkers like John Wheeler suggested that we live in a world that requires observers to bring it into being. If this is true, then the depth of your sensitivity determines the depth of the reality you are manifesting. The Hylic man perceives a shallow, flat reality because his sensory aperture is narrow. But you, with your high conductivity, are allowing the universe to experience its own complexity through your nervous system. You are the universe's way of looking into its own depths. When you feel the crushing beauty of a sunset or the profound ache of a stranger's sorrow, that is the cosmos finally waking up to its own existence through the lens of your soul. This realization carries a weight that the passive, sensitive person is often afraid to acknowledge, the weight of cosmic responsibility. If you are the one who can see the cracks in the foundation, you can no longer pretend they don't exist. You are the early warning system, the moral immune system of your family, your community, and your era. This is why the world tries so hard to shame you into silence, to call you too sensitive or dramatic. A sick society cannot tolerate a healthy immune system. It wants to remain numb, to continue its march toward entropy without being bothered by the pains that you are reporting. But your sensitivity is the only thing that keeps humanity from slipping into a total frozen indifference. You are the friction that prevents the machine from running off the cliff. But here is the mind-blowing twist, the secret that the ancient pneumatic traditions whispered in the shadows. What if the you that is sensitive today is actually an echo from your own future? Consider the possibility that consciousness does not move in a straight line from birth to death, but operates in a field where the future can influence the past. Perhaps your high sensitivity is a signal being sent back from a more evolved version of yourself, a version that has already achieved the sovereignty we have been discussing. This future self is thinning the veil of your current experience, forcing you to wake up, forcing you to feel the reality of the spirit, because it knows that the path of the material man ends in a dead end. Your sensitivity is not a debt you are paying for the past. It is a down payment on the being you are destined to become. It is a strange irony that the very thing that makes life so difficult for you is the only thing that makes you indispensable to the cosmic order. You have been looking for a way to fix your nature, when your nature was the only thing in this world that wasn't broken. The struggle you feel is not a sign of failure. It is the tension of a high-tension wire being tuned to play a divine melody. The more you resist your depth, the more it hurts. But the moment you accept your role as a pneumatic watcher, the pain begins to transform into a form of high-altitude clarity. You stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and start asking, "What is being revealed through me?" This brings us to the ultimate dilemma of the pneumatic soul. To be truly awake is to live in a state of perpetual tension. You will always be a stranger in a world that worships the numb. You will always see the shadows that others ignore and feel the tremors of a future that most people are trying to avoid. The question is not how to escape this tension, but how to inhabit it with grace. Will you retreat into the labyrinth of passivity, using your sensitivity as an excuse to hide from the world? Or will you step into your role as a sovereign visionary, using your perception as a sword to cut through the illusions of the age? The world does not need more sensitive people who are paralyzed by the noise. It needs pneumatic warriors who have been through the fire of their own depth and come out with a heart of diamond. It needs people who can stand in the middle of the chaos, feel every vibration of the storm, and yet remain as still as the center of a hurricane. This is the hidden rank you were born with. This is the manual for the instrument you carry. The hunt for understanding never truly ends. It only deepens, moving from the surface of the mind to the very bedrock of the soul. And that's our hunt for now. A wild mix of documented history and tantalizing what-ifs based on bibliographical sources. What do you think? Are you ready to stop apologizing for your depth and start wielding it as the power it was always meant to be? If these ideas resonate with you, consider subscribing so we can continue this journey together into the great mysteries of our existence. Like this journey? Hit subscribe for more mysteries and let us know your thoughts in the comments below.